Towards the end of the 1000-year Blood War arc, we had witnessed one of the most broken abilities in all of Bleach. This of course was Yhwach the Almighty, which possessed the power to transform the Quincy King into an essentially unbeatable opponent, who is able to see all possible futures and to alter them at his will. With him possessing such a broken ability, conventional methods of combat had become utterly useless against him. So how on earth would somebody go about defeating Yhwach, who already knows every single move that you are going to do before you make it? The final fight against Yhwach represented the highest stakes within Bleach that we had seen up until that point. If Yhwach were to have succeeded, then he would have merged all of reality into a singular realm, returning it back to its primordial state. This would have effectively ended existence as we know it. Yhwach had become so powerful at this point that it made sense why Ichigo's chances seemed impossibly slim to defeat him. But thankfully, it wasn't just Ichigo going up against Yhwach in an incredible plot twist which captures the themes of Bleach, which are growth and redemption. We see two of Ichigo's most formidable enemies, Aizen and Tsukishima, both work together in order to assist him with defeating Yhwach. With Tsukishima's Book of the End full-bring ability and Aizen's Kyoka Suigetsu, these incredibly unique abilities appear to be the perfect counters to Yhwach's seemingly unstoppable power. In this video, I want to talk about the role that everybody played in assisting Ichigo, in particular Tsukishima and Aizen. I'll be breaking down why Aizen's Kyoka Suigetsu and Tsukishima's Book of the End were uniquely suited in order to counter the Almighty. You definitely want to stick around to the very end of this video, as I'll be explaining why exactly the Almighty had failed. Now, before we dive into the video, I have launched an all-new channel focused on games, reviews, and general commentary. So far I've uploaded 2 videos, one covering the release of the Nintendo Switch 2 and another video detailing everything that we know so far about GTA 6. If you enjoy my content and want to see me covering material other than anime and manga, then definitely subscribe to my new channel Super Alpha EX. So coming back to the topic of the video, in order to appreciate how Tsukishima and Aizen had managed to counter the Almighty, we need to first understand what makes the Almighty so formidable. This Shrift ability isn't simply about predicting the future, it is a pretty comprehensive power which transcends just normal concepts of seeing into the future. When activated, the Almighty gives Yhwach multiple irises and pupils within each eye, a visual representation of his ability to see multiple futures at the same time. With each new pupil that appears, Yhwach's power and his perception does grow stronger, and at its full potential with 3 pupils per eye, Yhwach is able to see every possible future timeline at the same time. The Quincy King himself had explained to Ichigo during their final battle that he doesn't see a linear timeline which stretches forward. Instead, he sees all possible futures, describing them as countless grains of sand scattered outward from the present. Each grain represents a different future outcome or possibility, and Yhwach has the ability to observe all of them simultaneously from above, giving him perfect knowledge of every potential outcome. The Almighty goes beyond just normal observation. Its true power lies in Yhwach's ability to select and modify these futures that he can see, as he declares to Ichigo that the future can be changed. Now for Yhwach, it's pretty simple to change the future, as all he has to do is shift from one grain of sand to another. The Almighty renders normal combat utterly futile. Any strategy, technique, or power that you might want to use against him is ineffective, as he already knows how it works and how to perfectly counter it. Thanks to the Almighty, it allows Yhwach to implement countermeasures before any attack is even launched. We see a perfect example of this when he shatters Ichigo's all-new Bankai instantly, just immediately after he activates it. He already had seen the power of Ichigo's new Bankai in the future, and he preemptively had broken it in all possible timelines so he wouldn't have to deal with it. What is even more terrifying is that Yhwach possesses the power to rewrite his own death. When Ichigo lands what should be a fatal blow, Yhwach simply states that using the Almighty, he can rewrite any future in which he dies, essentially making him immortal. Now this is perhaps the most godlike aspect of the Almighty, which transcends death itself. In addition to this, Yhwach's Shrift grants him instant comprehension of any ability that's used against him. I mentioned this earlier, but once he sees a power, he inherently understands it completely, which enables him to nullify it or become immune to it. This is why even Ichibei, with his control over names and powers, ultimately falls before Yhwach. With Yhwach possessing such comprehensive knowledge and control over all futures, the Almighty truly represents the peak of power within Bleach. No wonder it was deemed to be unbeatable by conventional means, as it requires countermeasures which operate outside of the normal understanding of combat and causality. Now this is where the abilities of Tsukushima and Aizen come into play. Aizen's Zanpakuto Kyoka Suigetsu possesses the ability known as Complete Hypnosis. This power allows Aizen to control all 5 senses of anyone who has seen his Zanpakuto's release. He is able to create flawless illusions which are indistinguishable from reality to his victims. As absurdly powerful as Kyoka Suigetsu was during the Arrancar arc, it found its perfect application against Yhwach's the Almighty during the 1000-Year Blood War arc. A key moment where Aizen had realized that the Kyoka Suigetsu was effective against Yhwach was early on in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, when Yhwach had visited him within Muken, the 8th and lowest level of the Soul Society's underground prison. So what ended up being a very simple but brief meeting with Aizen where he was bound and restricted was in actuality the foundation for the eventual counter to the Almighty, as Aizen was able to use it against Yhwach in order to manipulate his perception of time, as he wasn't aware of how much time that he had spent outside of the Shadow Realm, thanks to the Kyoka Suigetsu which Aizen had used. What makes Kyoka Suigetsu the perfect counter to the Almighty is the fundamental nature of both of these abilities. The Almighty relies entirely on Yhwach's perception, so this is his ability to see all possible futures and to choose between them. But what happens to the Almighty when what Yhwach is seeing isn't actually real? Now this is exactly where Aizen's Kyoka Suigetsu is able to create a fatal flaw within Yhwach's the Almighty. You have to remember that when Yhwach sees the future, he is perceiving it through his own senses. So if those senses are compromised by Kyoka Suigetsu, then what Yhwach perceives as the future is merely what Aizen wants him to see. In essence, Aizen creates false futures that Yhwach believes to be real, undermining the very foundation of the Almighty's power. When Yhwach returns to the Soul Society after appearing to have defeated Ichigo, he's confronted by what appears to be Ichigo and Renji attacking him from behind. Yhwach easily subdues them, confident in his own victory, but when he seemingly impales Ichigo through the chest, but he is shocked to discover that he didn't impale Ichigo, it was actually Aizen that he was attacking this entire time. This is thanks to him being under the influence of Kyoka Suigetsu. In this key moment, the real Ichigo then appears behind Yhwach and strikes him with a devastating blow. Despite the Almighty's power to see all futures, Yhwach couldn't distinguish between the illusion that Aizen had created and reality itself. He saw futures in which he countered Ichigo's attack and had cut off Renji's arm, but those futures were fabrications that were created by Kyoka Suigetsu, because the entire time he was fighting against Aizen and not Ichigo and Renji. So thanks to Kyoka Suigetsu, we see a perfect logical counter. Omniscience means nothing if what you're perceiving isn't true. Aizen didn't try to overpower the Almighty, he just easily changed the fundamental nature of what Yhwach was seeing, creating a blind spot in his otherwise perfect vision. This now brings us over to Tsukishima. So while Aizen's Kyoka Suigetsu managed to deceive Yhwach's perception of the present and future, it was thanks to Tsukishima's Fullbring ability Book of the End, which had provided the other half of the perfect counter by altering the past itself. Book of the End allows Tsukishima to insert himself into the past of any person or object which he cuts with his sword. This isn't simply implanting false memories into his target, he literally changes history from the perspective of his target. People who are affected by the Book of the End end up recognizing Tsukishima as someone who has always been in their lives, as a friend, mentor, or even a reliable uncle. More importantly, Tsukishima can modify the past of objects themselves, changing their properties or condition in previous points of time. When Yhwach ended up shattering Ichigo's Bankai Tensei Zangetsu, he did so across all possible futures by using the Almighty. Even Orihime's rejection ability couldn't restore it because from Yhwach's point of view, there was no future in which Tensei Zangetsu had remained intact. This created an insurmountable obstacle for Ichigo. But then Uncle Tsukushima arrives with the Book of the End as he cuts Ichigo and he creates an alternative past where Ichigo's Tensei Zangetsu had never been broken. This wasn't an illusion or a temporary fix, it was a fundamental changing of history from the perspective of Ichigo. What makes Book of the End such an effective counter to the Almighty is that it operates on a completely different temporal axis. I have said this before, but I need to reiterate this point: the Almighty manipulates the future, while the Book of the End changes the past. Yhwach, with all of its power to see and alter the future, has no ability to perceive or change modifications that have been made in the past. This creates a fascinating paradox, as Yhwach sees all futures branching from the present, but Tsukushima changes the present moment itself by altering its history. By creating a new past where Zangetsu had remained intact, Tsukushima essentially spawned an entirely new set of future possibilities that Yhwach hadn't even accounted for. So while the Almighty allows Yhwach to see all futures like grains of sand which have been scattered from the present, Book of the End moves the starting point from which those grains of sand end up being scattered from. Suddenly, all of Yhwach's carefully observed and selected futures become irrelevant because they branch from a past that no longer exists. With Tensei Zangetsu restored through this revision of history, Ichigo gained access to power that Yhwach thought he had neutralized, as he now has an opening that would prove to be critical in his final confrontation with Yhwach in the Soul Society. When Yhwach was defeated, it wasn't just a matter of Ichigo landing a powerful, decisive blow. For Ichigo to even have landed this attack, it required precise timing and the perfect application of multiple abilities that together created cracks within Yhwach's seemingly impenetrable defense. The downfall of Yhwach had begun with Aizen using Kyoka Suigetsu to distract him upon him arriving within the Soul Society. By creating the illusion that he was fighting Ichigo, Aizen and Renji at the same time, he manipulated Yhwach into focusing his attention on the wrong target. This was critical because it divided Yhwach's concentration even within possessing the Almighty, as he still needed to actively process the false information that he was receiving. Now, a few moments earlier to this, Tsukushima's intervention had already happened as he altered the past of Ichigo's Bankai with the Book of the End. This coordinated effort culminated in the perfect moment when Yhwach believed that he was facing off against Ichigo, but he was actually striking down an illusion that was created by Aizen. This opened the perfect window for the real Ichigo to arrive with his restored Bankai as he delivered what should have been the fatal blow. At the moment of Yhwach's death, he demonstrated the true extent of his ability by using the Almighty to rewrite the future in which he died. He effectively resurrected himself, and this is where the final piece of the puzzle to defeat Yhwach had come into play. Uryu's arrow, which was made of the Silver of Stillness, had then come into action, with the still silver arrow representing yet another temporal contradiction which Yhwach was unable to account for. The still silver arrowhead was created from the silver clot formed within the heart of Uryu's mother when she was affected by Yhwach's Ashvalan. Now this arrow had the unique ability to evade the foresight of the Almighty, similar to how Pernida cannot be seen within Yhwach's the Almighty too. When the still silver arrowhead makes contact with Yhwach's blood, it momentarily makes him lose access to the Almighty, thus creating a brief window in which he is vulnerable. This final component was perhaps the most poetic, as Yhwach's own power, the Ashvalan, which had claimed so many Quincy lives, ended up becoming the instrument of his downfall. So with Yhwach's power nullified, Ichigo seized the opportunity to deliver the truly final blow that had ended the Quincy King's threat once and for all. So it wasn't raw power that ended up defeating Yhwach, it was the combined effort of everybody involved, including Uryu, Orihime, Tsukishima, Aizen, Renji, and Ichigo, which had resulted in the defeat of the Quincy King. It is truly beautiful that during this final battle, Ichigo's former enemies come together and they become instrumental in defeating the final antagonist. Aizen, who had once sought to overthrow the Soul King and to position himself as the god of reality, had helped to defeat Yhwach, Then you have Tsukushima, who had once tormented Ichigo by inserting himself into the past of his friends and family, and now he uses that very ability to help Ichigo in his most desperate hour. Even Uryu's role carries huge weight, as he is the final Quincy who had survived Yhwach's Osvalin, as he nullifies Yhwach's power via that arrowhead which was made from the remnants of his own mother. It's the ultimate example of how Yhwach's actions return to haunt him. The Ashvalan that he casted over 9 years ago, where he had discarded all of the impure Quincy, had become instrumental to his downfall. And overall, I love the idea that Ichigo defeats Yhwach not by becoming more stronger, but by forming connections with others and relying on even former enemies who possess abilities that are perfect for countering the Almighty. So yeah, we have reached the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to all of you. What do you guys think about the collective efforts of everybody which had assisted Ichigo in defeating Yhwach? Are you impressed by the role of Tsukishima and Aizen with their respective unique abilities? I'd love to know what all of you think. If there's anything that I've forgotten to mention about Tsukishima or Aizen's role in this final battle, then let me know by continuing the discussion in the comments, and I do hope for this battle to be expanded upon within Core 4 of the anime, as I'd love to see more of Tsukishima, Ginjo, Aizen, Uryu, Ryuken and Isshin as they all work together in order to defeat Yhwach. So I am really looking forward to seeing how the anime is going to be adapting these final moments, and I'd love to know what aspects of the final fight against Yhwach you guys would like to see expanded upon. I look forward to reading all of your comments, and lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I cannot wait to see you in my next Bleach video. A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.